So I was talking to my friend Danny earlier, and he said, "Mark, you should do video on that." So I said, "Okay, I can do a bad sound, bad lighting, bad everything video on that. No problem. Can I? Let's find out." Basic crux of the conversation was, what do you do to have a good career? What should be your ethos? And I kind of pointed to the problem. The problem is if you look at the world through the lens of technology, so that's your frame, technology is your perspective, you're going to meet with nothing but disappointment. It's going to be a catastrophe for you. Technology is not some objective material reality through which you can view the world and know anything about it. And so, what happens to engineers, and I know lots of engineers, is that they get caught up in the, well, this is the wrong way to do this because technically, blah, right? And they don't see this is the wrong way to do this if your goal is, right? In other words, the goal comes first, and that determines the if, and that determines the right versus the wrong way. And often, two, three, four, five engineers in a project will have completely different goals. And so maybe for their goals, the way they're doing it is right. But then for the other people, the way they're doing it is wrong. Fair enough. They're both right. No one's wrong here. That's why you need a hierarchy and a management structure. So what I was explaining to Danny was, look, one of the reasons I did consulting and was fairly successful in consulting, I mean, I could have made a lot more money, that's true, but my goal was not money, it was comfort. Could have flown around the world, charged $1,000 an hour for my time. No question about it. I was building Beowulf clusters before a cloud was a thing. Like, we were doing cloud before cloud, including all the automation. All the automation you see in Amazon, I've written, literally all of it, by myself. Not that hard. Amazon Cloud is not full of wonderful innovations that weren't around in the 90s. It just isn't. The reason why I was successful as a consultant was because when I went on site, and if they were, you know, paying $350 an hour for my time, and sometimes they were, and I said, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Well, here's our goal." And I would say, "Okay, have you considered X and Y?" And they would say, "No." And I would say, "Well, would you consider those things?" And they would say, "No." And I would be, "Okay, well, you have a goal of this, and you want to get to here, and maybe there's a goal misalignment." And I would point that out. They wouldn't agree. It's like, well, I get paid by the hour. You can listen to me or not. Because my definition of success as a consultant is not giving the customer what they want, because I can't do that. I can get them as close to what they ask for as I can get them given their constraints. And those constraints might be out of their hands. So I did a contract recently, actually, not too long ago. And it was a new executive, C-suite executive, come into a company and promised the moon. There's only one moon, and they're not getting it. And I told the consulting company that had hired me, I said, this isn't going to happen. The things he told them are not implementable at all. And they're not needed. Worse yet, like, he just promised a bunch of stuff that they didn't need. And, were there improvements to be made in the organization? Oh, of course there were. Like, I've never been to an organization didn't have improvements that could be made, especially on the technology end. Like, I'm a technologist, is what I do. I know software development inside and out, upside down, backwards and forwards. Not everything, but damn close. I've been doing this for a long time. And I've done every aspect of software development. I've written software by myself. I've written software with teams, right? I've written automation. I've built cloud systems. I've built infrastructure systems. I've written end user software, but only twice because I hate end user software. I've written I've done embedded code work, like, you name it. I've almost certainly done it. AI, done tons of AI. I prefer support vector machines, but whatever. Those are fun. So there are constraints based on what's going on. You can't just walk into a place and not have constraints. It's a great talk. I forget who did the talk, but he talks about Bell.com. And the moral of the story is they want to do microservices, but the management structure of the company, of Bell.com, may or may not be an alias with only a one-letter change, was such that managers in the company, but in the software development part of the company that did the software development, could only be promoted if they had success at running a large team. If you're doing microservices, you can't run a large team. Incompatible. Never going to happen. Can't happen. Not a combination that works. When you go into a corporation and they, occasionally they'd ask me, well, what do you think of Agile? And because I'm not shy, I would say very diplomatically, usually more diplomatically than I'll do here, of course, due to time. And it's hard to be diplomatic to a general audience. It's very easy to be diplomatic in a context. It's very hard to be diplomatic generally. I would say, well, Agile was originally designed for a company of, I think, 10 to 15 senior software engineers who all had 10 plus years of experience. And they designed these methods or experimented with these Agile development practices because they wanted to build a company with no middle-level managers. So if that's you, footnote, I never worked for a 10-person company that engaged me as a consultant and asked me about this, ever. If that's you, maybe Agile is the right answer. Maybe. And I would leave it there. None of these companies stopped using Agile. None. They were paying me a lot of money. That was your answer. Instead, I would work with the team to give them a modification to Agile that the management team could live with to meet their needs, and that the team could live with to make their software engineering efficient. Did this sometimes involve the software team, what would we say, feeding the management team information that could have technically been considered inaccurate? Maybe. But it got the job done. And because I care about getting the job done, the fact that they didn't listen to my advice, Agile was not going to work for them or was going to have limitations that didn't allow them to reach their goal, and the fact that maybe they couldn't reach their goal even if they had listened to me about most of the stuff, doesn't mean to me that I failed. I succeeded in the goal of getting them as close to their goal as I could with their constraints. Because sometimes, most of the time, almost every time, the company's not willing to do the changes that it takes to get what they want. This scales all the way down to people, but that's for navigating patterns. That's not for this channel. This channel is just to give you a hint of everything that scales down to people, because I talk about computers and pretend it doesn't also apply to people. But it probably does. Just saying. So I go into these companies knowing full well that they have a goal. That they may say, look, we're willing to do anything. We'll change our Agile process. We'll change anything about our Agile process. I at least 2 clients do this. We'll change anything about our Agile process to help fix this problem. And I would say, okay, because I know they're lying. I know they're lying. I know they're lying. They're lying. They're absolutely lying, right? I would say, okay, and this is the test. Foolproof test. No word of a lie. Foolproof test. One of the few foolproof tests you can get in your life. Say they were doing 2-week sprints. In both cases they were. I would say, what if we changed you to 3-week sprints? No, absolutely not. No. We haven't even started with a process change, right? We just started with let's just give our developers an extra week, an extra 50%, to be fair, 50% change in their velocity, in how often they're deploying code. Not even necessarily releasing code, because that to me is a whole separate issue. Releases and deployments are separate. The end of a sprint should be a deployment, not a release. Different argument. I've made it elsewhere, I think, but I'll probably make it again in the future just because. Nope. Off the table. Not changing. Why? Why can't you change time frame for Agile? Why can't you change time frame for Agile? Fear of change. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. hard to argue with. Management structure and management incentives are built on release cycle. Change the deployment cycle. You can impact the release cycle. That's true, although I would argue I never impact release cycles negatively. But if you're measuring time, if that's what you're measuring, like we need to get this release out on time, then it's not worth the risk. It's not. If you believe that more development time equals more releases or better releases, or you're tying development time to release, and you forget to factor out, say, meeting time for Agile, which is really high, like your development time under an Agile structure is very low compared to any other development methodology. Your developers spend way less time coding under Agile than they will under literally any other methodology. Which is not to say that all methodological implementations end up better than Agile, because they certainly don't, but that's a different argument. They would forget to factor out the time for meetings in Agile. The reason why you go to a 3-week sprint instead of a 2-week sprint or even a 4-week sprint is because in a 2-week sprint, you're just spending too much freaking time in stupid meetings. Because effectively, your long meetings are more often. So when you have more long meetings, you have less time for coding. It's really not difficult math. I promise you, it's just simple subtraction, right? But people can't make that connection because they're focused on deployment or release, right? Or how deployments affect release, right? They're focused on, well, at the end of a sprint, we have a thing that we can measure, and therefore more things that we can measure equals tighter control of development or tighter understanding of development or better understanding of development because we have more data, more measurable data. Right? All that's wrong. I just showed you. No, you spend more time in meetings and less time coding. Less time coding works to your disadvantage in 2 ways. The quality of your software goes down for sure. For sure. Right? And the amount of time your engineers can spend understanding their software goes down. Right? It just crumbles down. Right? And so more bugs creep into the software. And the software quality is lower. Those are 2 separate things. You can have bug-free software of low quality, and you can have high-quality software with a few bugs. It's not that big a deal, right? Because if the bug prevents somebody from running a function, that affects quality. If the bug is a typo on your GUI, and that can happen, that's not really affecting software quality all that much, right? Not in the same way. So it's also more forgivable. Spelling mistakes are forgivable by users. Function mistakes are not. So it's really important to understand everything's a series of trade-offs. And if you're trying to get the best technology, well, it's never AWS for anything, incidentally. If you're trying to get the best performance, the cheapest, like any metric you use, there's a bunch of constraints around that metric. Like once you pick a highest value, and you have to pick one, everybody's got one highest value somewhere, then a whole bunch of constraints appear. You can only do the best within those constraints. So you need to know that when you go to a place to work, whether you're a consultant or full-time or whatever it is, you need to understand the constraints, do the analysis. Oh, this is what they're paying me to do. Okay, I will do that. And realize, especially as a consultant, that you may not be able to hit the goals that they're paying you for. But that doesn't mean that you can't make it as good as it can get. And that should be your aim. Your aim shouldn't be some perfect, idealistic, utopia. That doesn't exist. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just go in and make things better to the extent that you can. And the bottom line is, and I know this has happened in a couple of cases for a fact, I've gone in, told people things as a consultant. They didn't listen to me, which is fine. You know, you got to get over that stuff. They're paying me a lot of money. They're not listening to me. I get paid by the hour for a reason, right? So I don't have to worry about whether or not people listen to me. It's harder when you're an employee, at least for me. It was always harder when I was an employee because I had a vested interest in the long-term success of the company. So it's like, oh, I don't want this company to do bad things that I know can't work, right? They're wasting a lot of time to get to a mistake that I've already told them they're going to run into. Consultant, not so much of a problem. But you have to be comfortable making things better for them in a way that's beneficial to them, whether that way is something they understand or not. Because I've gone into places, I told them the right thing, they didn't do it, contract came to an end, probably for the better, right? And the next person that came in told them the exact same thing, and that time they did it. So sometimes your failure will be your success. You just won't be there to enjoy it. And you have to be comfortable with that. And this scales down to people. And that's what you have to realize. If you want to be happy, you have to compromise with everything around you. You have no choice. Technology doesn't know about you or care about you. People implementing technology do not know about you or care about you. Right? Technology is a tool. It is not a filter to understand the world. It is a tool that is supposed to enable us. When we become its slave, we make it worse for everybody. Just the way it is. It's very hard to live in a world where people don't understand hierarchy. So I did a job interview a couple of years back, actually. They said, do you know Terraform? And I said, nope, never used Terraform. But what Terraform does, because Terraform is just a domain-specific language, I have written. So I've written tools that do what Terraform does. Actually, what Terraform does, for real, by myself, on my own. Took about 2 weeks, week, something like that. It's not that hard. When you've done it before, I've done it before. It's not overly difficult. Some people may find that hard to believe. No, it's not. Look into most of these projects like SaltStack and stuff. They're usually done by one person. Yeah, one person can do that. It's not that hard. If you're good, you may not be good. Not everyone's good. Most people aren't good at anything. It's okay. It's cool. Just people being people. It's fine. You're like everybody else. It's good. They wouldn't hire me because I didn't know the Terraform syntax for doing all the things that SaltStack does, that Puppet, which I do know, SaltStack and Puppet, and Chef, and I don't know, there's got to be a half a dozen other products that I've used. Terraform is just one of those little ones that I haven't. And it, you say, oh, Terraform is used by billions of people, whatever. It's tiny. Trust me. There's a lot of people using a lot of tools, and most of them aren't using Terraform. And it doesn't matter. Like, they all do the same thing. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap in the domain-specific language infrastructure tooling space. So, if you don't understand that, I don't want to work for you anyway. You don't understand what I'm bringing to the table. And I'm not saying, should I go in there and make them not use Terraform? I'm saying, if I know how to write Terraform, I know how to learn what Terraform does and is and how to use it. It's not a leap. It's not a big jump, right? Like, if you understand how to write a domain-specific language, it doesn't matter what domain-specific language you're dealing with, you could probably pick it up in a couple of hours. Not overly difficult. And not everybody can do that, granted, but I can, and I've done it. It's all over my resume. I can just do it for you, like on the fly. I can design a domain-specific language. It takes me a couple seconds, really. Just because I've done it a lot. Back in the day before all these tools were available, we used to do that by hand. I worked on teams that wrote entire subsystems to run over 1 million tests a night on 3 versions of operating system for 12 different physical hardware platforms, including Windows. But Windows was a tiny player in that space. So a bunch of different versions of Unix, HP Unix and DEC Unix, and I don't remember them all. There were so many of them. And we wrote a system in Perl 4 that configured everything, ran all the automation for all the tests on all the no cloud. There was no cloud. We built what would be called a grid computing cluster, but it was basically a cloud. We just had a lab with a bunch of machines in it and job scheduler, And yeah, we wrote all the stuff that would go and set up the compilers, do the compiles, wipe it all out, do them again if necessary, do them under multiple versions, reset the machine, reload the OS with an older version or a newer version of the OS because we supported 3 versions of the OS. It did all that, did all of it. Oh, and that same system did the integration work for the software, right? Integrated compiles, the whole 9 yards. Integrated all the tests, not just the unit tests, but also integration tests, because if you just run unit tests, you're an idiot. Integration tests, right, which were written by groups of engineers and by groups of not software engineers, but configuration management engineers, who are really good at scripting, by the way. And set up all the personal environments. So you could go to any desk in the development team, sit down, log in as you on any computer. Didn't matter if it was, a compact system or a digital system or a AT&T system or a Sun system or whatever, or an NNT system. Log in with your credentials, and then you would tell it what version of software you wanted to write code for, right? You should say, I forget what it was. We had some shell command or whatever. You'd open a shell and you type in blah, blah, blah. And it had its own domain-specific language, which I worked on part of, but I wasn't. I was ancillary involved in this in early days. Wasn't one that I wrote. Was too huge for one person to write. Actually, that was a big project. It's Fortune 500 company. And then it would configure all the compilers and everything that you needed for the OS that you were running on that machine at the time, which, that was a harder problem. Usually you were stuck with the OS. We didn't automate OS wipes for workstations, only for servers in the grid cluster. And we'll give you all the compilers, all the header files, all the links to the version of the software that you said you wanted to code for, and bring up your entire coding environment, most of which was stored in version control at the time. This was 20 years ago, 23 years ago. It was a long time ago. And you could just start coding, and then you could basically log off of that machine, go to your desk, pick up where you left off. 23 years ago. And that infrastructure was checked in. Configuration as code? Yeah, we were doing it in the 90s. That project was started in the 90s. I left in the 2000s, right after I made a bunch of innovations for them. Saved them millions of dollars, which they gave me none of, by the way. Don't work full time. Oh, worst idea ever. Went back to consulting, doubled my money overnight, doubled my income. So I gave them the best that I could. I could not push them to where they needed to be. On the other hand, they had a very stable system for a very long time. My buddy, who is still my buddy, ran it for another, 12 years or something. And it ran great. And they did upgrade it, and they used Perl 5, which I still think is a mistake. Perl 5 is an abomination to the world. Perl 4 was perfect. They shouldn't have touched it. Thank goodness for Python. And when I've consulted, I've never gone into a company and had them implement what I wanted them to implement to get them what they said they wanted. It's never happened. I've gotten them close before. And it's always a negotiation between the limits of the team you have, because sometimes your development team or your infrastructure team is stupid. You can only do so much with them, and they need a little more automation, a little more hand-holding, right? And sometimes the management is stupid, and they're just constraining the development team, and there's very little development team can do about it. You can give them workarounds, though. So you give them little workarounds, help them out, so that they can achieve their goal a little bit easier, and maybe the management doesn't realize, right, what's going on. But everyone's happier, so it's fine. It's fine, right? This is the way it is. You have to be comfortable with making things better and not perfect. It's key to happiness in everything, especially in consulting. Being a consultant's hard. It's really hard. But, as long as you're happy that you can get work done better than it would be done without you, you're doing okay. It's all going to be okay.